Well, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session this morning. My name is Barbara Smith. I'm from the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience at Coventry University. I'm delighted to welcome our panel, Suzy Russell from the Community Supported Agriculture Association, Gavin Siriwardena from the BTO, Nigel Bourn from Butterfly Conservation, and Alfred Gathorne-Hardy from Edinburgh University. So this morning we are going to be talking about biodiversity on small agroecological farms with less than 5 hectares. And the aim of our workshop is to engage you all in a project to establish biodiversity monitoring on small agroecological farms, which we think is a really important topic. And our aim is to gauge interest and current engagement in biodiversity monitoring, to understand which methods would be considered desirable and practical, to discuss the development of a national monitoring scheme on small farms. And we hope that we're really excited to welcome you all here, and we hope that you'll be able to contribute to developing this project and that it will be a project that belongs to all of us. I'm going to begin with the way we're going to structure the session today is we're going to start with a half-hour presentation by the panelists, after which we're going to open out the floor and have some breakout sessions to enable you to contribute ideas and help us to shape this project. And we're going to, because originally this was going to be live, so it would have been more informal, and due to our online status, we're going to break that into 2 kinds of sessions. One will be breakout sessions where we can have conversations together in small groups, and then we're going to have a more formal questionnaire where we're able to gather data that we can use to inform this project. So we'll explain some of the practicals of doing that later in the session, but without further ado, I'd like to start the presentation and introduce our topic for today. So I'm just going to begin by talking a little bit about this landscape scale approach that we think would be appropriate for this project. So quite a long time ago now, 2010, John Lawton produced his report on making space for nature. And the conclusions of this report was that we needed to change our approach to wildlife conservation. And he said, we want to change from trying to hang on to what we have to large-scale restoration and recreation, underpinned by the re-establishment of ecological processes and ecosystem services for the benefits of both people and wildlife. And this is basically taking a landscape approach, acknowledging that the way that we currently look at nature conservation is very fragmented. And on this slide, you'll see on the left-hand side, I have a map that's just for England. These landscape protection is managed nationally, and this is the map for England. And it shows the wildlife protection areas in England under the 3 types of protection that we have. That's about half the landscape in England isn't protected at all. And what this map shows is that these sites they're fragmented, they're not linked up together. And it's also important to remember that a lot of this protection is pretty weak and may not be implemented very well. There's a lot of white space between these sites. And agriculture is usually considered to be a negative impact on biodiversity. At best, it's a blank space, it has no effect. At worst, it has a negative impact. But we challenge this. We suggest that this is not inevitable. This is a function of how we choose to farm our land. The idea of linking sites together and thinking about the landscape altogether has been taken up by farmers, and some larger farmers are clustering together to pool resources to manage land for wildlife conservation. And we ask whether small agroecological farms could also play a role in landscape conservation to promote biodiversity. How could we think about these small agroecological farms, their placement and their management to link wildlife sites together? Could small agroecological farms be a force for good and play a very important role? Currently, they're not taken into account very much, and especially horticultural sites don't have a good reputation for preserving biodiversity. So this is the background and the underpinning idea of this project, and now I'd like to pass on to Suzy.
Hi, yeah, I'm Suzy Russell from the Community Supported Agriculture Network UK. And I just wanted to talk a bit about why this feels particularly important for us and why we've kind of started talking to this group in the first place about doing this work. So a while back, one of Barbara and Alfie's MSc students did a report which on productivity and biodiversity on small polycultural agroecological farms, and they included as one of their sites an established CSA outside Coventry. And the report, the MSc showed that it had very high biodiversity, but wasn't strong enough as a piece of evidence to start really using in the work, the sort of policy work that we do. So, and we know from visiting our CSAs, from images of CSAs, from the accounts of our farmers, that CSAs are extremely biodiverse and habitat rich. And we frequently get asked for stats on this, but we have very few. And I think that's partly because there's very little funding going into agroecological research at the moment. It's also because they're small farms, and generally research tends to be carried out on, agricultural research tends to be carried out on larger farms. It's important. 15% of commercial agricultural holdings are small farms, and there's some research from the Food Farming and Countryside Commission that showed that the best performing small farms are more productive pound for pound than best performing large farms. So there are a lot of them, they're productive, and there's also abundant evidence that they create more jobs, they're more resilient, and they're profitable businesses, apart from also their huge impact on biodiversity and habitats. So one of our biggest campaign points in the agricultural transition at the moment has been to ask DEFRA to remove the 5 hectare limit, because since 2014, when BPS was introduced, farms under 5 hectares have not been eligible for payments. And as the new payment system comes in, we know that our CSAs and other small agroecological farms are delivering what will now be paid for, which is public goods. So instead of paying for the amount of land you have, which is what the old payment system did, DEFRA are trying to make it so that you're paid for the public goods you produce, which is great for CSAs because it's what they already do in spades. And you might say, well, why do they need payment if they're doing it already? The payments now are to incentivize good practice. So they need to be there. They need to be part of the system. And we're still working to try and encourage DEFRA to remove that limit. Most of our CSAs, in fact, most small farms are horticultural. And as Barbara mentioned, horticulture has the potential to be extremely environmentally negative. But our farms show that there is a different way of doing it. So yeah, our CSAs all farm agroecologically, and they're putting back more than they're taking out. And what this research will do is give us some data that we can use to prove that in kind of academic, statistically proven terms, both as the value of these small farms in their own right, as kind of biodiversity habitat oases, but also as stepping stones in a wider system of habitats and biodiversity across the country. So linking up some of those blue, green and yellow spaces across the white spaces where in Barbara's map. And what we would really like to hear from you is your ideas about what you know already, what we should be measuring, and how you might use the information, because we also know that this information, apart from giving us policy tools that we can then push support for small farms and agroecological farming generally, we know from listening to our farms that actually some of you could use this data to attract funding, to attract visitors, to do new stuff. So yeah, it feels like it's going to be really important for all of us. So thank you for listening to that. And there will be a chance to ask questions later, but I'm now going to pass on to Gavin. So there you go, Gavin.
Thank you, Suzy. Hello, everybody. I'm Gavin Siriwardena from the British Trust for Ornithology, basically lead on farmland bird work at BTO, and I've been working on agri-environment monitoring and so on for longer than I care to remember. So I mean, as just to follow on from what Suzy and Barbara have said, we think this is really interesting and unstudied kind of area in our sort of farmland management, and particularly it's quite we're aware of various things about small farms, and one of them is that they potentially can punch above their weight in terms of their effects on biodiversity, particularly positive, and we're talking positive effects here within the farmed landscape. And this is because lots of things are mobile and get around the land, so they can use a bit of they can use the land in a small farm and then actually move from there into the other areas of farmland, and basically the small farm subsidises the area around it in terms of biodiversity benefits. And particularly that can happen if the management is right. So it's about doing the right thing and to maximise that kind of effect. To actually identify what that is, we first need to monitor what's going on at the moment in those areas, and how big that effect is, and how it varies with different farms, different contexts, to see where it's happening most, and what management, what interventions, what farming practices actually produce the best sort of effect from that small farm. And this is why monitoring is particularly important. We're also monitoring a lot of monitoring effort has a combined sort of value in that we have a lot of volunteer engagement at the BTO. You may be aware we do a lot of, it's basically founded on the principles of citizen science monitoring, and these are opportunities for the people to get involved with monitoring of with biodiversity, learning more about it themselves, and actually getting out into the countryside and being more engaged and aware of everything. So we think there's particularly with small farms, community sort of CSA type farms, which are often close to centres of population, it's an opportunity for the community to engage with farming as well as with biodiversity and the links between the two. So you go on to the next slide, Suzy, please. Thank you. And so within the sort of specifically for birds with the BTO, clearly birds are our #1 thing, although we also do other stuff. Everybody, I'm sure, will be aware of the sort of general declines in the landscape in farmland biodiversity over decades, which were identified due to from farmland bird monitoring that the BTO coordinates. And it's still critical to do that kind of monitoring, to monitor hopefully recovery of those populations, which is the target of schemes like ELMS and the preceding agri-environment schemes, with, it has to be said, limited success to date. But still we need to keep doing that monitoring. And within the sort of the context of farmland for doing that, mostly monitoring and evaluation, so farm scale experiments and so on, all of this stuff has focused on larger farms, the wider landscape, and monitoring of small farms is pretty much a gap in that. And it's not anybody's fault so much as it's a constraint. If you, on the right hand side, there's a sort of a mock-up of a BBS, Breeding Bird Survey square. It's a 1 kilometre square, so a sort of 5 hectare farm within a 1 kilometre square gets lost basically, and it's just not designed to pick up effects at that sort of scale. And birds, amongst other taxa, generally work at larger scales. So they use, as I said before, might use a bit of the farm some of the year, or for a few, particularly in the winter, and then actually move out and breed in wider areas around that particular location. So the landscape around those sites is critical, but those farms can also be honeypots, which provide particular resources, and as I said previously, punch above their weight in landscape effects. So the questions we're generally asking here is, how can we most effectively measure the benefits of small farms being with limited resources? We can't send professional surveyors to every small farm to count everything, for example. So how can we do it effectively, get good quality data from lots of different farms? And how then can we monitor the changes on those small farms and in the surrounding landscape that changes in management of that small farm might produce? So if we're suggesting you can actually follow best practice and do better on a local farm, what effect does that have? And we need to monitor that effectively. So we're interested in the best methods for doing that. And that's the sort of direction we're moving in. And I move on now to Nigel and Butterflies.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Nigel Bourn. I work for Butterfly Conservation in our evidence and science team. And so I thought I'd talk about why butterflies add a little bit of, essentially add the slightly smaller scale to the situation. So monitoring butterflies really complements the work of the BTO on birds, for example. So we have a very extensive monitoring network of butterflies in the UK, probably the biggest insect citizen science recording project in the world. As you can probably tell, we're quite proud of it. The graph on the right shows the, it's very unclear, isn't it? But that's 3,000 at the top. So we now have over 3,000 sites and recording effort by over 2,000 volunteers. The coverage is obviously shows the map of the UK, shows a really good coverage throughout the UK, and we can produce a whole series of trends with that data. And the one I presented there is the farmland one, for obvious reasons, which shows that since 1990, our specialist species that require chalk downland, for example, or grass or woodland, have declined by over 40%, and the habitat and the more general countryside species are relatively stable with a slight decline. And so the data sets are really powerful. And next slide, please, Suzy. And I just thought I'd present these as well. These are published every year in government biodiversity indicators. And I wanted to show these basically, these are the general trends. And I wanted to show them basically to make the point that this data is extremely useful when it comes to lobbying for change. So we want to understand, determine that these small sites, small farms do punch above their weight, as Gavin said, which I'm sure they do. We want to show that, and because we can produce these stats and these indicators, we can then lobby for the sorts of changes that Suzy was suggesting, and ensure that you know, that the small farms can benefit from agri-environment payments. I was going to go into the methods, and I'm not sure really. We have various methods. Some are very intensive, some are less intensive. So we're thinking about the same questions that Gavin raised about what most appropriate method for these small sites. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from you all. So over to Alfie, I think, next.
Hello, thank you everyone, and good to be here. So I'm going to be talking today about the results from a small pilot project, and this is the first time we've put these results out, so it's exciting for us and hopefully interesting for you. And we started this project because we had this problem that we couldn't effectively measure biodiversity on small polycultural sites. So we were looking at areas which specifically were polycultures, which we defined as having more than 10 species per hectare, or 10 species or varieties per hectare. And when we tried to use normal agroecological surveys, for example, putting quadrats out, we would suddenly hit the side of a polytunnel, which just meant the results didn't work. So we were looking for an indicator species, and we came up with the idea of bats. And the reason that bats are interesting, so bats are one of the 4 groups of animals which have evolved to fly. So the others are a group of dinosaurs and birds and insects. And apart from the dinosaurs, flying is an amazing technology for animals, and they've all done very well. So bats, almost 25% of UK mammal species and about 20% of global mammal species. But importantly for us, all the UK bat species are insectivorous. And so they're relatively near the top of the food chain, and we can use them as indicators for wider biodiversity. So during this trial, so what we were doing is we had a very small number of farms, 6 farms, and we were finding polyculture farmers who had an adjacent field, which was an intensive monoculture. So we'd ask them to put their bat monitor in 40 meters inside their polyculture, and an adjacent bat monitor 40 meters inside the intensive farm next door. And this was because hedges are often used as a kind of corridor for bats. And this was a way of, one more onto the bat side, please, Suzy. Great, thank you. And yeah, so this was a way of understanding which sites bats prefer. The other innovation for us was using what we call shoeboxes. So rather than us going out to farms and collecting the data, we were using, sending the bat monitors to the farmers. And this meant we could go to more farms, saved enormous amounts of time and money, but it was also an innovation for us, something we hadn't done. And actually was potentially one of the kind of positive repercussions of COVID, because the reason we initially did it was because of not being able to go to farms for COVID reasons. And the farmers would then send these back in a prepaid envelope, and we could use the BTO acoustic pipeline software to identify the species. So Suzy, if you could go on next slide, please. So this shows kind of what it would look like. So here you can see, like I said, so one bat monitor put up on a post 40 meters inside here we've got a field of wheat, and 40 meters on the other side of the hedge, in the polyculture, put up on a post 2 meters high. And I wanted to kind of flag it up here. This is the first project where, as an academic, I've worked on bats. And the reason I put this here is just to make it really clear that this technology can be used by anybody. But yet we think it's a potentially really powerful technology to use to identify biodiversity at this kind of scale. So following where bats are active and feeding, we hope can indicate where biodiversity really exists. So next slide, please, Suzy. So here's our results. So it's quite a busy slide. So just to kind of break it down for you, the top figure is bats and the bottom figure is crickets. So we weren't that interested in crickets, but we got cricket data anyway. And so I thought I'd give it to you now. And in each graph, you can see a green and an adjacent blue line. The green line is the polyculture site. The blue line is the monoculture site. And these have been collected. So the pairs are for either side of a hedgerow. And you can see we had 2 wheat monoculture, 2 grass and 2 maize. The top 2 figures are bats and the bottom 2 figures are crickets. And on the left of each pair, we've got the number of species. And on the right, we've got the number of calls. So if we look at the top left figure, we can see the number of bat species we got on every site. And so the green, the polyculture, every single time had more species than the monoculture, and actually had up to 9 species, that's half our UK bat species in total. So this is remarkable that in a single polyculture site, we had half of the UK species, and this was kind of repeated across a couple of our sites. And then if we go to the kind of the right hand of the top graph, we can see the number of calls. And here we can generally see much higher activity on the green, on the polyculture sites. Although on the second grass site, which didn't have so much activity in total, there was actually more on the grass site. And then jumping down to the bottom figure. So there we're looking at crickets. So crickets, we're not so excited by crickets because they don't indicate wider biodiversity to the extent we hope the bat data does. But we can see a similar trend here where the same number or more species generally occurring on the polyculture sites, the exception of being one of the maize sites where a single species would identified, but actually very little activity on that site as a whole. So what can we pull out from this data? We can pull out that we think this technique works. So both the idea of sending our shoeboxes of monitors off to growers can really help collect data at scale relatively easily for us, and that bats could be a really powerful way of detecting biodiversity at this small scale, at the kind of 1, 2, 3 acre scale. What we can't do is get too excited by this because, as you can see, it was a really small number. So we had 6 farms here. So enough to definitely say, right, we're going to hope to roll this out in this year and the next few years at a much larger scale. But we can't definitively, we couldn't publish this, for example, in a peer-reviewed paper. So I also want to just do a really big thank you to the growers who did this, and to Stuart from the British Trust for Ornithology who guided us through, and to the student Sanya who did the work for this. So there's the first time the results from the bat data has been made published. And with that, I'm going to pass back to Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfie. Thank you, everyone, for a very interesting introduction and presentations. I'd just like to wrap up the presentation by pointing out what we already have. So we already have a huge, we've got big resources for us to develop a project like this. we've got sites across the country. So I put a map there of across the UK, and I've put a map of the CSA sites, but we know there are many, many small farms across the country that we haven't got mapped. We also have people who are committed and interested. So the UK Land Justice developed an ecosystem map that was putting together links between different organisations that were working on land management. And here in this one, the image on the middle left, you can see that conservation and rewilding, environment and climate justice are really important in those groups. We've got commitment and interest from the community. And of course, there are networks of NGOs across the country. This is just a few, I've just put a few logos there, but there are a lot of NGOs, as we all know, who are working and recording biodiversity and working on conservation across the country. And I think what's quite interesting is that actually there are some links between these organisations, but in general, I don't think we're very well joined up. And this is a real opportunity for us to come together to work for the conservation of biodiversity. As a wider community, we've got this huge resource. And we also have understanding. So Natural England last year produced their habitat map guidance. And this talks about opportunities for linking sites together. We understand how biodiversity works at scale. So we've got the understanding, we've got the commitment, we've got the sites, people working and growing. And we've got this opportunity to put this together to get the more, better, bigger and joined that Lawton asked for all those years ago. And so we think this is a real opportunity for us to kickstart this project. And that's why we're really excited to have you here and to bring your ideas in to the project. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask you to help us by answering some questions. So these are some questions that are underpinning the ideas of our next two sessions. We'd like you to think about what biodiversity friendly practices can be implemented on small farms, how that monitoring should be managed on small farms. Should you have open, what kind of open access to external surveyors is practical, reasonable, acceptable? Do we want to have long-term partnerships with particular local volunteers or local organisations? How practical and useful is farmer self-monitoring? If we do monitoring, it needs to be comparable with national monitoring schemes, and how much of that monitoring effort is acceptable without disturbing farm operations, and how practical is it to liaise with neighbouring landowners? How much can we really join up together? So these are the questions that we'd like you to think about when you're answering the questions and having your discussions in the breakout groups. Come the next slide. So what we'd like to do in the next, I think we've got about an hour, is the first thing we'd like to do is have a breakout discussion group. And we've organised this using a Padlet. So the Padlet is going to be in the chat, the link to the chat if you'd like to open it. And when you go into a breakout room, if you could note your breakout room number, that will be the number of your group in Padlet. And if you could put all your comments underneath your breakout room number, that would be great. Please do choose a scribe and make notes in the relevant column, although you will all have access to the Padlet and will be able to write. It might be more useful if you've got one person scribing. And because we're not able to be in all of the groups at once, we are going to be in the main room. If you've got any questions, do send us a message and we can pop into the group. One of us can pop into your group. Otherwise, we'll be monitoring the Padlet and noting down ideas for us to use in a Q&A. We'll then return for feedback and a Q&A and a discussion. And then after that, we've got a questionnaire that we'd like you to fill in individually so that we can gather data for putting together this project and to gauge people's interest. So the first thing is we're going to break out into rooms, and then we'll come back together for a Q&A. So
I'm just about to put you into breakout rooms. Just make sure you've opened the Padlet before you go in, because then you'll have access directly to it. when you get into the rooms, there should be about 8 of you in each room. Decide who's going to scribe and answer the questions in the Padlet. So I'm just assigning people to the last few rooms, and then I'm going to press the magic key. You'll get put into your rooms. You've got 25 minutes and then we'll call you back into the main room. Okay, off you go.
Thank you everybody for doing that. There's some really great points and loads of stuff going into the Padlet system, which Barbara will be really relieved to see working so well. So that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I'm just going to try, I sort of took on the role here of trying to pull out some common points, which I'm not sure I've managed to do particularly, but a couple of sort of points of interest arising from that from the various comments that people have made that we can just deal with here, which I'd just like to sort of flag. The first one is there's really Keith, not surprisingly, but it's still good news. Lots of people, lots of positivity about the wildlife value of small farms, potential wildlife value, and also about the sort of potential for monitoring and importance of doing that across the groups, which is what we're here for. So that's great. That's really good to see. Couple of questions, things that came that I've pulled out that are quite important, and somebody's mentioned the potential importance of the surrounding landscape context on what farms do, and I think it's absolutely right. It's really, that is going to be really important. It's something we need to take into account, and it has positives and negatives. If you are close to other places with lots of high quality biodiversity, then you're more likely to get that on your own site. You can point it the other direction. If you're not, then your site is going to be more limited, and we have to make sure that people are, if you like, sort of nobody's going to be penalized for anything. I'm searching for the right word here, but people are actually given sort of kudos for attracting what they can in the landscape if the landscape isn't that positive for wildlife. But then you could actually have more positive effect on that landscape close by if you're in a more impoverished landscape. So that's possibly, it works in two different directions. Somebody's asked about encouraging biodiversity and encouraging pests, and it's absolutely the case. There is generally the literature out there on biological control and so forth, and would suggest that in a more diverse system, then pests are kept down. So are these places likely to be reservoirs for pest species? Possibly so, but on the other hand, they also will be areas where pests tend not to be, certainly won't be promoted in high densities. Those sort of agricultural pests, if you start going into as somebody's mentioned, the concept of vermin and non-wanted, if you like, non-desirable elements of biodiversity, these things are complicated, and you put resources into the landscape and stuff is going to be there. So there's a whole area to discuss there. But again, you need monitoring to know how much what that effect is, and then if you find something that is an issue, then you can deal with it. There's important stuff about monitoring and the potential for monitoring. So people flagging the sort of time and ID skills as sort of clear barriers here, and that the self-monitoring side for farmers and growers doing it themselves is probably best done if it's automated. That's much easier for some taxa that we might monitor than others, such as bats. But this is something we can work on, and these are elements of the ideas we want to get to with the projects that we're talking about. So that's sort of in scope. We think so time as a major barrier to people doing this kind of thing is clearly something we're going to have to deal with and think about ways to doing it. And what we need to know from you is what is the potential to do for you guys and people, volunteers on small farms and community farms, to engage in volunteering. Has anybody in these systems got the time to do that? If they have, it would be great. If they haven't, then that's okay. Can we actually engage more people from the local community who might not currently be involved in the farm to do sort of monitoring activity? That's another question. There was a question about farmers being worried about, with monitoring, if you have one monitoring going on, being worried about becoming a designated site and then getting constraints on what can be done on the land. This is a perennial issue and a thorny problem that we potentially need to get around. And I think it's it is tricky. It's an issue of an element of trust with government and, say, Natural England, whoever else is doing the designation, and that's something we need to work on and try to deal with. I think the one key thing is that if you do have good stuff, these sorts of things that would lead to designation on your land, then you are doing, quotes, the right thing already, in which case we would hope it's not a big deal for you to keep doing that. But it is an issue, that issue of constraint, and I know people that is sensitive, so that's something we shall take into consideration. Very important point about soil biodiversity and sort of soil in general. It is sending in soil analysis is certainly a possibility. The issue with soil analysis of it and anything like that is there's costs attached, so that needs to be dealt with, and we need to, all of this ideally needs to be something which we do for a research project or a short-term project, but also has long-term applicability, so it carries on longer term. So we need to deal with that. There are kind of, not necessarily for soil biodiversity, but for soil structure, there is a very good app available to do that, the My Soil app that was generated by Bangor University. That's something to think about, and we can maybe talk to them and getting involved with that work. The issue with that, when I downloaded that onto my phone, it took all the memory on my phone, so I had to take it off again. But that was there are all these things have kind of some sort of teething issues potentially, but there are options to do that sort of thing. And yeah, I mentioned sort of connectivity aspects and talking about systems for monitoring and development of apps. This is something that basically, as part of what we're trying to do with the project, is working out how best to deal with this whole area. Do we engage with existing monitoring projects and programs, or do we try to create something on our own, which is specific to small farms? I think personally there's a lot of benefit in integrating with what's going on already, but certain systems don't work very well at small scales, which is why small farms tend to slip through the net, as I said earlier. So it may be that we need to do something bespoke, but that's the kind of thing we need to work on, and it's all in the mix. And the final general point, there was in one group, there was quite a lot of stuff about data validity and acceptance for the wider community or sort of policymakers. And that is a key thing. And I think Nigel's already responded in the chat to this, but generally certainly the data on birds and butterflies are already accepted government indicators. And at one point they did have official policy targets associated with them. Those were taken away, but they are accepted as official government statistics. And this is, so there is that, at least it's an open door. Clearly there's nothing specific in there about small farms, but about farmland, and this is as a measure of the health of farmland is definitely in place and broadly accepted. So that's something we can build on and do more for. So that's all I've got out from sort of other issues. I don't know if others on what's next. Barbara, do you want to come back?
Well, thank you, Gavin, for doing that. And thank you everybody for contributing and for all the ideas that you've put on the Padlet. It's fantastic, thank you. And we hope that we'll be able to build this into the project and help guide it. There's some messages in the chat saying people would like to be involved, and Alfie is about to stick a link in the chat for you to sign up. So do leave your email and say who you are in that. all that data will be kept secure on a secure server, and we'll be applying GDPR, so we won't be spamming you, sending you random videos. So do feel confident to sign up there. And then for the last 20 minutes of this session, we'd like to give you space to answer a questionnaire that would be really grateful if you could fill in. And these are personal questions, they're individually filled in, asking questions that we think will help us with developing this project. Alfred's going to put those links. There's one for people who are currently growers or managing land, and another for people who aren't growers but are still interested, but we would still value your opinion and your contribution, even if you're not growing at the moment. So if you would be able to fill those questionnaires in, that would be fantastic. Really enjoyed this session. I think it's been really interesting. I hope that you've enjoyed it too. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to all our panelists, to all of you, and to ORFC and Ben, who's been volunteering and helping us manage this session. It's really complicated doing it all online. But I hope that it's been useful for you too, that you've enjoyed it. Does growing grass pasture count as grower? Yes, I think so. So yeah, thank you very much. Please do take part in our project. We'd love to shape it so that it's really good for our community. I think we've got a massive opportunity to make a big difference to biodiversity in the UK, and for linking our growing community with our currently separated nature conservation community. So thank you very much. Please do, we're going to stay in this main session, the panelists, so we'll be here if anybody wants to just have a chat with us until the end of the session at 12:30, or if you've got any questions about the questionnaires, just turn your microphone on and ask us. It'd be nice to see you.
Just to say as well that your questionnaire answers will really help get some support to run this project, so please do take the 10 minutes it'll take you to fill them in. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Indeed. I'd just add, I am capturing all of the comments that are in the chat. I'm pulling those out, so if you have got to dash off or something, I mean, prefer you did the questionnaire, but if you have put stuff in, that will be captured. And if you've got any other, couple of questions have gone into the chat recently that we couldn't stay online and answer now. So to anybody who's coming, who wants to chat or ask those specific questions. Okay,
Dan has just said he can't get the link. Dan, do you want to tell us, just turn your microphone on and tell us which link isn't working?
Hi, yeah, the link that Alfie just sent, contact form.
It's not working. Okay.
For the contact form, you could just leave your email in chat. It's working for me, but it took a little while to come up.
Yeah, it's not allowing me to access. It says invalid dynamic link. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Well, do put your contact details in the chat, and then we'll add them to the list. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just spamming the list with putting the links in again and again, so that it doesn't drift too far up the chat. But yeah, if they're working for me, but I'm afraid I don't know what's happening if they're not working for others. Sorry about that.
The contact form has appeared, but it's not. It doesn't have a hyperlink, so you can't copy it.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's possible to change.
So I've put it in just the contact form this time. I don't know if that makes a difference.
Yeah, you can't copy and paste it. It won't paste at all. It's just
just click on it, Mick.
Yeah.
I managed to get it to copy and paste the contact form anyway.
So if you just click on the link directly from the chat, it should open it up in a new tab for you on your browser.
No.
I think it may be if you're on Hoover, it doesn't work. I mean,
I've had this problem before. I'm on Hoover.
Yeah.
Maybe switch. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. We hadn't foreseen that.
You should be able, if you can see the link, you should be able to click on it, copy and paste into your browser. That ought to work.
If you all put your emails into the chat, we can send an email out to everyone with a link to both the forms and the contact form afterwards. So if you can't get into any of the forms, just put your email in and we'll send everyone an email out after the session.
I think I've had this problem before. I thought it was just me, but I think it is Hoover just doesn't allow you to use copy and paste for some reason.
Okay, I can see a few people are saying that the link's not working. So we'll send all 3 links out in an email later today or tomorrow. And yeah, please do fill in the questionnaires. It's super useful. And any other thoughts about whether it would be you as a grower farmer, your volunteers or additional volunteers? I think that'd be really good to get some feedback on, and what you'd need in terms of support, whether that's money for your time or how it could actually work.
Just to add in, so we had some nice I was in a really interesting group earlier, and one of the points was made is that if things could be built into a regular routine, then it can work as part of your kind of regular activity, and that might make it easier. And those kind of points are really useful for people like me who spend most of my life sitting at a desk rather than outgrowing. If you can help us make it easier to help you to collect the data, that'll be really exciting.
That was supported by the group that I was in as well, who were talking about the complexity of recording biodiversity and the need for technical support so that the data that's generated is of good quality. So if you have any idea of what you'd need in terms of support, please do put it down, and then we can build that into shaping the proposal.
Yeah, the fact that our links aren't working here isn't an indicator of our general technological abilities.
One thing I don't know if we've asked, but it'd be good if anybody's got any thoughts. We were thinking 3 years and then hoping that people would carry it on after our project had ended. But I don't know if people have any thoughts on that. If you do, bung them in the chat.
Yeah, Andy, you ask, Andy, have you got you wanting to ask a question, Andy Turner?
And yes, thank you very much. I'm afraid you can't throw tomatoes and rotten tomatoes and so on. I'm afraid I'm a nasty big farmer. I love all this stuff, and I'm very lucky with all the things gone. I very much feeling that selfishly, I would love it if the smaller farmers would work with the neighboring big farmers. I personally believe quite a lot of the big farmers would join in. So it would help the smaller farmer, as you mentioned, if you're surrounded by built up area or the railway, whatever it is. But we would like to work with smaller farmers around. And I think the benefit would be twofold. One is that everyone would benefit, the small ones and the big ones, and it would spread the word. And in terms of, I happen to believe passionately that we want to save the world, we want to work together. If we want to save our bats, we want to work together. And I won't move from that. So I'm hoping you can find a way to engage the larger landowners as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think we were focusing on smaller farmers because we feel that they've been overlooked. But linking everyone in the landscape is just very important. Yeah, Andy. Sorry.
One of the things, Andy, we were talking about that came up in one of the Padlet comments was whether we take into account what was surrounding each of the small farms. And obviously by doing that, we're then looking at the impact of having a nature-friendly large farm on your doorstep or a non-nature friendly bit of intensive monoculture. So that there's potentially are those links there too.
My vulgarity knows no bounds, because one of the other things you perfectly reasonably mentioned is time and cost. For the big landowner, the costs of this might only involve hundreds or a few £1,000s, and they probably find that not too burdensome. And as I said, I apologize for the vulgarity, but it seems it might as well take the opportunity of taking their resources as well. And I'm pretty sure most of them are incredibly positive. I do have very few friends who would be negative about any such approach.
I agree with that, Andy. I'd like to just add, because we work in a way where we're trying to connect with the other larger farmers around us. And to start with, they just all thought our environmental changes were bonkers. But very gradually, there's more and more evidence that they're coming and saying, well, how did you get the grant to plant those trees? And how could we make the difference that your bird monitoring is doing? And wildflower strips are going down everywhere around us, which is fantastic to see, because there is a sea change. But I think if the government put clusters of farmers together in the new environment land management, with the money that will follow that, it will start to make a change in lots of ways, as greening is already doing. And yes, a vulgar conversation though it is, it's what's making the difference to green manure and ground cover that we're starting to see around us, which you would never have thought would have appeared on those farms. So there's good news coming in. It perhaps is coming in from the wrong direction, but at the moment, like you, I think we have got to get it to happen quickly. So wherever it's coming from, it's welcome.
On those, I've fortunately been sort of increasingly passionate about all this since the early 90s, when these first set-aside came out and so on. That was the big lost opportunity. That would have been permaculture in the whole nation. And then my dream was to actually tell the people in America, if you want to sell your maize here, you look after yours as well. But that's going another step. But that yes, the opportunity that the resources that the big landowners have is once exploiting.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
It takes the response. We have had a farmer in our little group who mentioned simply dead hedge piles, was saying how suddenly you put a dead hedge pile and it was like having an opera hedge within days and so on. And so these sort of various things that we've been seeing happening over the time, and the headlands, all our headlands have 10 or 15 meters of messy grass and so on, and so the hedges aren't trimmed so often. All that very simple thing that has cost relatively little I'm a great fan of it.
Well done. And I'd say these are the things that even the small, very small growers were talking about, leaving patches for nature, patches for wildlife. Even if you've only got a small area, that principle holds true. But for those that have got very large areas, you know, pond corners, wild space stuff, it's an easy done, isn't it? Trees, we're going to lose a lot of ash. It's inevitable. We know they're going, but at least if we can get that dead wood and the scrub not all cleared up, not all tidied up, we can leave habitat that will create new environments for other species to come in and benefit. So yeah, more of that to come, I'm sure.
With the you're talking of the hedge clippings and so on being left, I pollarded big areas of ash and so on for my own, try and see how it will work, and leaving it there, and it is magic, and it's so easy. And so again, the big farmer, I can dig a pond in the corner for 3 or 4 grand, and I can put the strips of trees, which over the years I've done all with grants and so on, and I've got to go through the more complicated loops now. They're probably not so good, but we can carry on, and it just simply works. And we're so lucky, because when you're doing it on the big area, when I then see a part of our churchyard, we'll say we're going to leave a bit of that to go wild. It's okay, but I'm relatively not disdainful about it at all, but it sort of reminds me that of my responsibility, that I'm able to do any amount more. We've got it on a corner of our cricket pitch and in the village here, and it's just a bramble blackthorn mess, which isn't all bad. Of course, it has that, but so the big farmers are the ones to do it. And please keep trying. I'll shut up now, but please keep being more sympathetic to us.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I feel really excited by the enthusiasm from all of you for this. And yeah, the fact that we may soon be able to kind of prove how brilliant CSAs and small agroecological farms are in terms of biodiversity and habitat. So thanks everybody for your amazing input.
Thank you very much.
Could I ask a question? How might partnerships be developed between local wildlife conservation charities like the wildlife trusts and, for example, CSAs in pooling volunteer resources and skills?
So others might have other things to add. We've been, at the moment, we're working out whether we use existing volunteers from the partner organisations who are represented here when there are volunteers in the area where the small farm is, or whether we train up new volunteers. So there's kind of, and in the future we may potentially sort of grow the network to include other NGOs working in the field, so like wildlife trusts. And I mean, obviously there's also potential for each individual farm to kind of look to who they have around them to build those relationships. But you know, if Gavin, Nigel, Barbara, Alfie, you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. I'd add that I think generally we'd be hoping to engage with more people, new people, additional people, because there are a load, BTO in particular, we've got loads of volunteers out doing loads and loads of monitoring work, but they don't have lots and lots of spare time because that's what they're doing already. So we can't pretend we've got a huge resource of people who are available to do more stuff. So, but we do want to grow that network, get more and more people confident. A lot of it isn't about skill. Some of it's about skill, but a lot of it's just about confidence, that you know enough. A lot of people who are out in the countryside know enough about the common biodiversity in the countryside to do some useful monitoring of that biodiversity. They just don't necessarily have the confidence to do it. So a lot of it is down to monitoring methods and so on. So we do want to grow and try to do that, for sure.
One of the ideas that we were throwing around was whether we would be pairing sites with like a local wildlife trust in a sort of buddy system. That was one idea that came up that we're still cogitating over. Might be one way of doing it.
I was just going to say I mean, I could potentially grow some volunteers, but at the moment I don't have volunteers just that I could call on 10 volunteers to be like, come and help me do this thing. If you're asking one of the questions about if people are interested in being trained to do the surveying, so would you be doing it then on other places as well as your own farm? Is that the idea? And if you were traveling to another place, would you get any kind of compensation for that? I'm just asking for because, you know, it's difficult, time, money, resources are, for smaller farms, a bit scarce, do you know what I mean? We're just running, trying to do what we can do, do you know, and I haven't done any kind of biodiversity surveying, but it is something that obviously it's not obvious, but it's something that we are very interested in, is to try and increase our biodiversity. Sorry, my dog's barking downstairs and I'm a bit worried. What's his day? Wait a minute. I'll just turn this off just now.
Turn the video off, not your sound, but that's okay. That's fine.
Just in answer to Carol's question, we're really keen that we know that when we engage our farms at the CSA network in research, it's really important that we make sure that we cover their time. So yeah, we're looking and exploring ways that we could, certainly cover things like travel and work in a way that means it's beneficial for the farm, not a pull on time that's going to end up with the research not getting done. So there are various ways it might work. It might be that you get trained up and you just monitor your own farm. You might go and monitor farms nearby if you have time. It might be that it's your volunteers, for instance, on a CSA where you probably already have volunteers. I know there's some people that have put in the chat that they don't already have volunteers, so they'd probably be external. So yeah, we're exploring all the different ways, and that's something we're really keen to get responses from you in the questionnaires about, to know how to make that work so it does work for you and doesn't become a drag and a sort of pull on resources. Yeah, absolutely. And if it is a drag on resources, it's not going to be sustainable, even if you can get people to do it in the short term. So yeah, we clearly need to speak right. And had a comment in about public liability insurance and so on. That's all part of the same. It's all part of the same area. And basically, it's within sort of the volunteer monitoring that say BTO and butterfly conservation do. We basically rely on the goodwill of people to go out and do it, and we're not supporting them financially to go out and do it. People are generally doing it because they're really keen and they get a lot out of it themselves. It's a positive. They're not doing it because they are monitoring the wildlife for the government for free. That's not, they're doing it because they enjoy doing surveys of wildlife. And it is a rewarding thing to go out to the same spot and you see stuff that you don't normally see, and you go to new areas, and you get familiar with a place that becomes like your patch, and then something. It's interesting to see how that changes over time and what you pick up. So it is a kind of, it's something that people find as a personally interesting thing to do, and then therefore they pay for it themselves. The issue of insurance is a thorny one. I'm not sure where BTO does not have a global policy for that, but when we're not asking people to go to places, people are doing it voluntarily. So if you're not asking people to go onto your farm, and I think that's where you can, there's basically there's gaps over that. I don't know if Nigel's got any thoughts on that, but this is an area we can that's certainly important for us. We wouldn't brush it under the carpet, and it's something we can consider in developing.
Okay. Without wanting to be the party pooper, we have reached our time, and I think for the organisers it's good for us to keep to time. So I would like to say thank you very much for everybody. It's been amazing, just fantastic to have so much enthusiasm and feedback. I hope I'm speaking on behalf of all my panelists. But yeah, it's 12:30, so we've got to finish. But thank you very much for all your input. Please do keep in touch. Please do get in contact with us via email or whoever, or whatever other method, and leave your contact details and we'll be in touch with you. Thank you.